Good morning, my friends. And guess where you are? You're at the 10-minute book talk, where we talk all things bookish with you for 10 short and sweet minutes. I am Marie Bostwick, and I am here today with my hostesses with the mostesses, my author friends, bestselling author Katherine Reay, waving, and the beautiful Rachel Linden. And today, friends, we are super excited because we have the pleasure of having Aimie Runyan here to talk about her book. It's been out for a while and I just hadn't gotten around to reading it. Oh my goodness, if I'd known how much I would have loved it, I would have done it on day one, but you know how it is. So many books, so little time. But this is a book worth making time for. School for German Brides. Terrific, terrific book. Aimie, we are so glad to have you here today. Please tell us a little bit about your fabulous book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. The School for German Brides is kind of like what it says on the box. It's a story about the bride schools that were invented, that actually starting in the 1920s to, I'll go back to that, but they were invented actually in the 1930s to promote marriage and solid families, which was an important part of the German kind of ideology of the time. And it's a story of a girl who loses her mother, and she's about 17, so on the cusp of womanhood, and her father sends her off to Berlin from the countryside to live with his brother and his brother's wife, so her aunt and uncle, in order to kind of finish her last year of high school and to make a good match and to basically finish up her childhood. And it's a very traumatic experience for her, despite the fact that, she sees that her aunt and uncle are, they're willing and eager to take her in and do right by her, but she realizes that they're involved very heavily in the Nazi party, of which her late mother was very, very dubious. And then our other main character is Tilda, or Matilda Altman, and she is a Jewish woman who had always aspired to become a lawyer, but that profession became forbidden to her starting in the 1936. And we'll discuss why that is in a bit. But she ends up working in her mother. She's half Jewish, half Aryan, and working kind of as the front person for her mother's tailoring and seamstress business because she looks Aryan enough to be safe. And this is before the war. The story starts before the war and before things are definitely ramping up. The water's starting to boil, but we haven't gotten quite to the point where people are being rounded up en masse quite yet. So she's kind of working, protecting her mother by being the front woman for her seamstress business, but not kind of living up to the potential of her dreams, and feeling very, very stuck until she meets a lovely young man, and their story gets more and more complicated as the war ramps up. And the two characters are linked by a young woman named Clara, who is really kind of a very important character. She just doesn't get her own POV, who is a classmate of Hannah, our Aryan main character, and the seamstress instructor. She's a student of Tilda, who gives her sewing lessons. And she links the two characters, and their stories become enmeshed as the war gets underway.
It's a great ensemble cast. It really is. Yeah. I know we have tons of questions, and Rachel.
Yes, I have a question.
You first? Okay.
I remember seeing this book cover everywhere when it came out. And when I saw it, every time I was like, ooh, School for German Brides. Ooh, School for German Brides. So it was such a catchy concept, and one that I had no idea existed. So can you tell us, these were real schools? How did you stumble upon that? And how did you kind of research? What was your process to figure out about them?
Well, the funny thing was I stumbled across the bride schools when I was doing research for Across the Rhine River, because both books have the similarity of being told behind enemy lines, so to speak. They are the German perspective, at least in part. As far Across the Rhine River is only in part, but School for German Brides is all in the Lion's Den in Berlin, which is a perspective we don't see that often in historical fiction because it's risky. Because you don't want to you have to make the characters human, but you don't want to come off as being in any way sympathetic. to, any of the Nazis. So it's a rare thing to do in historical fiction, but the books have that in common. But I have a character who is in a very similar situation to Hannah. Her name was Meta, and she was getting married off. She'd been part of the BDM. Meta had been which is the Bundesdeutsche Mädel, which is the German League of German Girls, which is the feminine equivalent of Hitler Youth. And think of like Nazi Girl Scouts, basically. And she was getting married off to an SS officer, and I was researching, well, they're going to have wedding traditions. Weird Nazis had weird traditions for everything. So I go off on Google Nazi wedding traditions and come across an article from New York Magazine, I believe it was, and it was syndicated in several places, that they just declassified information in 2014 about these bride schools, and and so you see them mentioned very slightly for Meta. So Meta and Hannah could really be the same character, but I switched the timeline around and a lot of the circumstances. But yeah, poor Meta was shipped off to one of these, as well as Hannah, but they were schools that were derived. So after World War I, we had the mother schools that were brought forth because the infant mortality rate was super high, and they wanted to teach women how to keep their babies alive, best practices with nutrition, hygiene, and all of that sort of thing, and safety. So, on the surface level, looks like a good thing. But of course, there's a eugenics component that's gross. But they took it a step further because they knew that the Nazi ideology was that women belonged to the home to make lots of healthy German babies to help populate the master race, and the men were the breadwinners. So it was very, very traditionalist society. And then you have the Russians kind of on the other end of the spectrum, where women, at least on paper, could go fly airplanes like we see in Daughters of the Night Sky, do whatever they want, at least legally. It doesn't mean they were welcome, but they legally could do whatever they want. And you have American Britain kind of in the middle, where they have women ancillary groups.
So interesting, such an interesting.
Can I jump in with my question, because it's right on that. I thought it was so interesting that Tilda wanted to be a lawyer and Hannah's mother was a doctor, and you just sort of honed in on a very traditional society. Women were meant to be, wives and mothers. But tell us a little more about when those laws changed, when they really were excluded from, the dreams they had of careers and jobs. And
yeah, so the only two professions I'm certain about was the law. And this, so in the case of Tilda, she wasn't allowed to practice law because she was a woman and Jewish, or at least Jewish enough to get in trouble. She was half and half. And I won't get into all the family dynamics there, but her grandfather on her mother's side and her father were both lawyers, and she wanted to follow in the family business. And her father kind of betrayed her grandfather. It's very sad. And so she was forbidden from practicing law, and all women, whether they were Aryan, Jewish, or otherwise, were forbidden from practicing medicine other than midwifery. Women could deliver babies. And Hannah's mother, Elke, was brilliant, and she was an amazing physician, but she really resented being relegated to being a midwife when, her expertise spanned much further. But she snuck around helping anybody that needed medical care, especially those who were like, we see there's a Roma family who are, they obviously can't go seek medical help, because that was one of the first groups persecuted by the Nazis, were the Roma. And so she basically becomes a doctor of the downtrodden, and Hannah's father's not pleased by that decision on her part.
Well,
Sadly.
I've got one more question for you. I know, because we're excited about this. Tell us, you've got some new things coming up soon. Tell us what's next for you.
So in May, I have this and I'm sorry, it's hard to read with the bright. Oh, there we go. The Castle Keepers, with my dear friends and co-authors, Rachel McMillan and Janelle Siselsky. And it is about 3 generations who are basically charged with the keeping of this beautiful castle in the north of England. And it spans from in the 1870s and the conflicts that England was involved in India at the time, and then World War I and World War II. And it's members of the same family that are all charged with the keeping. And of course, we see the changing social values from generation to generation, where the aristocracy was still very much intact in 1870 and falling apart by 1946. And all those social changes. And it was a joy to work with those two authors. I got to write the 1870s piece. So we have a Gilded Age dollar princess from America going off to marry for a title. And it was great fun. And it was a project that was born of lockdown. And it was so great to have that contact with those authors.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. And my next solo book is August 1st, coming from William Morrow again. It's called A Bakery in Paris. And
Love that
yes,
one.
and I don't have the cover to share yet, but it's a dual timeline that takes place in 1870, which is going to be a theme for me for a while. And it's the Paris Commune and the siege of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War and the aftermath. And a woman that builds a bakery in order to keep, and she is given up access to her privileged lifestyle to live with the man she loves and open a bakery.
Aww.
And then the other timeline is her great to whatever degree granddaughter, I should know that, great granddaughter, I believe, in 1946, whose mother has gone missing during the war, and she's charged with looking after her two younger sisters. Her father was killed very early on in the war, and she ends up having to reopen the bakery to support her family. And so it's both kind of them coming to terms with the aftermath of war in Paris and the similarities and the differences in their lives. And it was just a joy to write. And the gentleman I was dating when I was coming up with book ideas said, "You should write a book about the Paris Commune." And I said, "Yeah, I should." And then I married the guy that suggested it. So, it all worked out.
Nice.
Okay, I love that. I love that.
Love that.
Well, we are
Yeah.
all looking forward to it. Friends, thank you. Be sure to go get a copy of Aimie Runyan's School for German Brides. Aimie, thank you for joining us here today on the 10-minute.
Thank you.
And friends, we'll see you next week on the 10-minute book talk, where we have all the best authors. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Amy.
you.
Bye-bye.